everybody, Happy New Year. Ireland had a successful Eurovision song called What's Another Year? And that's what we're going to look at in this video. What is another year? What constitutes the length of a year? And how is it decided when it starts and when it finishes? And you'll find out in the video that depending on where you are in the world, that's not necessarily the same. Not everybody throughout the world is, as I'm shooting this video on the 31st of December, not everyone is celebrating New Year tonight. So we'll have a look at when it was decided and how it was decided that this is the night that ends the year and tomorrow is the first day of the year in Western culture, and how it's different in other cultures, and how the length of the year and how the year is measured is different in other cultures. We'll have a look at that, and we'll also have a look at traditions surrounding New Year, the celebrations and some of the old traditions that surround New Year, and how surprisingly old the idea of New Year celebrations are. So what is another year exactly? Well, if we go into the various calculations, it would be a video in itself, in fact probably multiple videos in itself. But the calendar that we generally use in the West denotes a year as the time it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun, which is actually more or less 365.25 or 365 and a quarter days. Now, as we can't have a year of 365 and a quarter days, we compensate this by having 3 years of 365 days and every fourth year a year of 366 days. The extra day, as you know, being added to the end of February. There are some cultures and religions that adopt a lunar year. Now, the lunar year would be exactly 12 months of a lunar cycle, from new moon to full moon to waning moon to dark moon. Which is roughly about 28 days. So their year would be slightly shorter than the one we use. So when does the new year begin and when does the new year end? There are plenty of points in the year that could be taken as a beginning and an end of the year, and different cultures have adopted different starting and ending points. There are many social and cultural events throughout the world celebrating the beginning of a new year, and these are some of the oldest celebrations in existence. The earliest known record of the New Year festival dates from about 200 BC in Mesopotamia, where in Babylonia the new year, Akitu, began with the new moon after the spring equinox, which is in mid-March. and in Assyria with the new moon nearest the autumn equinox, which is mid-September. For the Egyptians, Phoenicians and Persians, the year began with the autumn equinox, September 21st. And for the early Greeks, it began with the winter solstice on December 21st. On the Roman Republican calendar, the year began on March 1st. And in Ireland and England, in my memory, the tax year used to begin on March the 1st until it was switched back to match up with the actual calendar year. I presume this practice went back to Roman times. But after 153 BC, the official date was moved to January 1st, which was continued then with the Julian calendar, which came in 46 BC. But as late as medieval times, most Christians in Europe regarded March the 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, as the beginning of the new year. Although the new year was observed on December the 25th in Anglo-Saxon England. William the Conqueror decreed the year began on January the 1st. But England then later joined the rest of Christendom, making it March the 25th. Now, the Gregorian calendar was adopted in 1582 by the Roman Catholic Church, and that became the main calendar used throughout most of the Western world. And they restored January the 1st as the beginning of the year. Most Europeans followed suit. Scotland in 1660, Germany and Denmark about 1700, and England in 1752, with Russia being as late as 1918. Some religious cultures using the lunar calendar have continued to observe the beginning of the year on days other than January the 1st. In the Jewish religion calendar, for example, the year began on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the month of Tishri, which falls between September 6th and October 5th. The Muslim calendar normally has 354 days each year. As I said, the lunar calendar tends to be shorter than the solar one. With the new year beginning in the month of Muharram. The Chinese year is celebrated officially for a month beginning on late January and early February. Other Asian cultures celebrate the day at various times of the year. In southern India, the Tamils celebrate New Year at the winter solstice. Tibetans observe the day in February, and Thailand, the day is celebrated in March or April. The Japanese have a 3-day celebration, January 1st to the 3rd, which is the same as the Western calendars. Now, I want to build up my subscribers to my channel. I want more, not less, so I'm not going to subject you to my singing voice, which will definitely drive subscribers away. Instead, I will recite Auld Lang Syne as a poem, which is the way it was originally written by Robert Burns anyway. And it will give you an idea of the meaning behind it, which is literally what New Year is about. Auld Lang Syne translated means old long ago. So it is looking back. But if you listen to the words, it's also about looking forward. So it's about looking back with nostalgia, looking back with regret, looking back at the things that are gone and the things that are lost, but also looking forward with hope, which is what New Year is all about. And sometimes it's the triumph of hope over experience, but the one thing about New Year is it always brings an element of looking back, it always brings an element of reflection, but it also brings an element of hope that things will be better in the new year. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind, should old acquaintance be forgot and the days of Auld Lang Syne, For Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll drink a cup of kindness yet, for the sake of Auld Lang Syne. And surely you will buy your cup, and surely I'll buy mine. We'll take a cup of kindness yet, for the sake of Auld Lang Syne. We too have paddled in the storm, from morning sun till night. The seas between us lord and swell, since the days of Auld Lang Syne. For old acquaintance be forgot, and never brought to mind, should old acquaintance be forgot, for the sake of Auld Lang Syne. For old acquaintance be forgot, and never brought to mind, should old acquaintance be forgot, in the days of Auld Lang Syne. For Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll drink a cup of kindness yet, for the sake of Auld Lang Syne. As you can see from them words, it's looking back at the past and toasting the future. That poem was written by Robbie Burns, but it was more than likely taken from a much older poem, and will go back much further than the era of Robbie Burns, as does the whole concept of New Year, as we looked at how far back it goes. And we also looked at how in different cultures the year is different lengths, and how in different cultures the year starts at different times of the year. Many of the customs of the New Year festival recognise the passing of time with, as we said, both regret and anticipation. The baby is a symbol of the new year, and an old man the symbol of the old. And this dates back to the ancient Greeks. The Romans derived the name for the month of January from the god Janus, the two-faced god, who has a face looking both forward and backward. So as you can see, the theme going right back to ancient times is looking back with nostalgia, with regret, with satisfaction, depending on your experience, but always looking forward with hope. The practice of making resolutions to rid yourself of bad habits and to adopt better ones, that also goes back to ancient times. Some believe the Babylonians began the custom more than 4,000 years ago. The early people making resolutions, it was more than likely to gain favour with the gods and say, I'll be a better person in the next year. In the West, particularly in English speaking countries, as I said, this poem that I just read, for Auld Lang Syne, really sums up the idea of looking back and looking forward. In certain cultures, there's symbolic foods form parts of the festivals. And cabbage formed a big part of the festival, or other greens, because the greens and greenery denoted prosperity and good luck. People in the southern states of America, it's black-eyed peas. And throughout Asia, foods like dumplings, noodles and rice cakes are eaten to celebrate the new year, and because they symbol long life and happiness. There's also a great belief that how we start the year is how it's meant to go on, which is one of the reasons people have parties and people surround themselves with people and noise and merriment and so on, because they believe that that kind of celebratory feeling will carry on into the new year. Most people doing it now haven't got that particular belief, but that's where that kind of revelry came from in the first place. We all know about the famous public gatherings in Trafalgar Square in London and in Times Square in America, watching the ball come down to signify the new year, and the big fireworks display at the Sydney Opera House, at the Eiffel Tower, and here in Dublin off and along the quays of the Liffey there's fireworks, and there is usually big concert here at Christchurch Cathedral, when, as is customary in a lot of Western Christian countries, the bells of the main cathedrals and churches signal in the new year. I also remember as a child, and I'm not too far from the docks where I am now, I also remember as a child listening to the foghorns. I don't hear it so often now, but listening to the foghorns of all the ships in the docks going off at midnight. That's evocative personally for me of the new year coming in. There are certain traditions in America. The first Rose Bowl game was played in Pasadena on January the 1st, 1902, and nowadays college football games have come to dominate New Year's TV. Another practice, very much practice in rural Ireland, not so much in urban Ireland where I come from, but in rural Ireland, certainly in Scotland and places like that, and northern England as well, is the practice of mumming. It's basically where people dress up in costumes, usually made of straw. Now, mumming happens at different times over the festive period. There's a practice in certain parts of rural Ireland on St. Stephen's Day called the Wren Boys, where they hunt the wren, and that's a similar practice to mumming. But in a lot of parts of England and some parts of Ireland and Scotland, mumming usually happens on New Year's Day, where they go around, they act out a specific play of a battle between two people. It was originally, I think, a battle between Britain, the Moors, or as I say laterally in Ireland, Ireland. It's other traditions would have, but didn't specifically have mumming, would have masquerade balls around this time too, as well as very similar to Halloween. An interesting thing in neo-pagan culture, or people who follow the old ways, a lot of people see Halloween, October 31st, November 1st as the new year. I personally don't subscribe to that particular ethos, as I see the year as secular rather than linear. So I don't kind of subscribe to the whole idea of a new year as much as a new season. So I suppose you could say the year changes significantly 4 times a year, and depending on which one is your favourite, you could plunk your new year there at the start of that and say, this is where my year starts. There was a rather humorous line in a sitcom called Goodnight Sweetheart, where a time technician said, oh, time was only invented to sell sundials. There's a certain amount of, not truth to that obviously, but it makes a certain amount of sense that in our modern world time is measured very precisely, and needs to be. It needs to be. Those of you old enough to remember all the fuss that we were afraid of, the chaos that would happen with the Millennium Bug, shows how interwoven the exact measurements of time is. But if you think back to our ancestors, it was much more loose. All they really needed was the seasons. When arable farming came in, the 4 seasons, summer, autumn, winter, spring, that's all they needed, sowing, spring and so on. Going further back to our herding and hunter-gatherer ancestors, even less seasons than that. They just basically needed to know when the summer started and when the winter started. But in our modern society, the precise measurement of time has become more and more and more important. So we measure it up. Do I subscribe to the theory that it's relative? I think I do. I certainly think time at a party seems to move an awful lot faster than time walking, or than time doing something we dislike. So is time precise or is it perceptive? It's an interesting discussion and could be a long discussion, but it's certainly in the modern day time is measured precisely. And as far as the modern Gregorian calendar has decided, and the one that our society and most of Western society lives by, 2023 ends tonight at midnight and a new year begins tomorrow. Whether that new year brings you better things, whether that new year brings you a new start, I suppose it's entirely up to you, up to fate, up to the gods, whatever you think. But I hope it finds you well, it keeps you well, until we're pondering the same questions this time next year as to how our year went. Will we look fondly back on it, or will we be glad to see the back of it? Will we look to the new year with trepidation or hope? Will we be thinking, I hope the next year is better than the last, or will I be thinking, I hope the next year is half as good as the last? I suppose these are all New Year's Eve is a ponderous day. So I wish you all the best. I hope you enjoyed my look at the concept of the year and the concept of New Year. And I hope, however long or short it is, however you measure it, whenever you start it, whether like us you start it today, or whether you start it in February or March or October, whenever you start it, whenever you finish, I hope it's a good one. I hope it brings you nothing but joy and nothing but happiness and little sorrow. So happy New Year, and what I tell you it will bring you a lot more videos, which I hope you will subscribe. I hope you will hit the notification button to make sure you don't miss. I will be doing a lot more on history and so on, if that's your interest. I will do a few more on movies and things like that, more in the traditional style. But I hope there will be something for you on my channel, and I hope you'll stick around, and we'll be having a chat again this time next year, and looking back on what 2024 brought for Mist and Stone channel. Slán, and have a happy, prosperous and healthy New Year.